Hi, I'm here to talk about the quantitative methodology chapter. One of the first things that really popped up in the discussion forum to me was the idea of talking about ethics. And so I wanted to give you a little background about research in higher ed, which is that in order to do any kind of research in education, psychology, medical research, if you are using human subjects, you have to fill out what's called an IRB, which is an institutional review board kind of paperwork. And so you fill out this paperwork about this research that you want to do. Like, you can't even conduct the research until you fill out this paperwork. You submit it, and then the university has a committee made up of people both within your school and outside of the school. So for instance, I'm in the School of Ed, so I might have people in the School of Engineering reading my proposal as well. And people are trained on this, and they will either approve or disapprove or ask for modification to an IRB to make sure that your research is ethical. For example, my research, I work with students, and I work with them one-on-one with videos. And so one of the modifications I had to make was I had to let my children be aware of like some of the repercussions, like they might be anxious that they're being videotaped, and so they should know that upfront before participating, is that they might have anxiety from being videotaped. And so these are kinds of things that are done. There's a pretty well-known psychologist called Watson. Maybe you've heard of him. And if you have extra time or just are interested, you could Google baby Albert experiments. And this is probably an example of a very unethical experiment. So Watson was curious and if he could condition a baby to be scared of different things, like a little white rabbit. And so he collected
In the early part of the
data
20th century,
like
psychologists John Watson and Rosalie Rayner set out to teach a baby boy called Little Albert to fear white rats using the principle of classical conditioning. This is a film of their work.
So in this film you can see that baby Albert at this point is not scared of the animals, and they can run a series of experiments to try to condition him to be scared of the animals. So by the end of the experiment, baby Albert is
Little Albert's
quite
conditioned
scared
fear
of
of
animals.
white rats would generalize to stimuli that were similar in key ways to a white rat.
So you can see him crying now. That's completely unethical. But the reason why I wanted to show you this quick little YouTube video is that this is qualitative research right here. Right now, what we're looking at, we're watching a video, we don't have any numbers. We can see that this is affecting him, and it's definitely qualitative the way we're looking at it right now. I'm sure Watson collected some quantitative statistics on it, but what we're looking at right now is qualitative and it's still unethical. So one of the comments I wanted to make to the discussion forums is ethics transcends quantitative and qualitative research. It's not just qualitative research, not just quantitative research that can be unethical. It can also be qualitative research that's unethical. So it's very important to be conscientious about your participants and the kind of things you want to investigate, and never fear. We definitely have policies in place to kind of prevent a lot of that from happening still. In terms of your research article, you can pick any article you want this week. I just posted this on Foxtail as an example of a quantitative study that I found interesting: the impact of middle grades mathematics curricula in the classroom learning environment on student achievement. Typically, if you're looking at an article, always start off with a background of literature. And so that's a really good place as you're digging into literature. So just some advice as you're looking for articles. I remember when I started digging into my first research project, I didn't know where to look. And I mean, certainly you can do Google Scholar searches and in Primo on our library website, but there's things cited that you might not have read here. So, and you can look those pieces up and you can learn more about other people's research that these people are citing, because research is ultimately always supposed to build on each other and fill gaps. So that's kind of the background here. And usually a research article will then funnel to a theoretical framework, but here it funnels through a conceptual framework, which is fine. So basically he creates his own framework based on the literature, and this conceptual framework here is about curriculum. So there's the intended curriculum, and then there's the textbook curriculum, the attended curriculum, and then what's actually assessed curriculum, and then all this kind of influences what's actually implemented in the school, and then what the students learn. And so this was really important for his article because he was looking across, well, he and his colleagues were looking across use of curriculum, types of curriculum, use of curriculum, and student achievement. Then the research questions should be clearly stated or obvious to find in an article, but it's very important that the results are connected to the research questions. Sometimes in research articles that's harder to see than others, but usually in higher tier journals, and so this is a really good journal in my field, they are connected pretty well, and it's pretty obvious to see how the results connect to the research questions. And so since there's 3 research questions, as I'm reporting on the results, there should be 3 main things. And so even though this is a quantitative piece, if I was writing my analysis here, I would want a sentence that maybe, like, imagine yourself having a conversation with somebody where you could answer these questions then. Then it goes into methodology, and this is basically what you just read your chapter on methodology. So the chapter, I think it was 8 in the Cresswell, we were reading on quantitative methodology. And so here, when we look through this, he'll report on his sample. So the difference between population and sample, I mean, when we think about the U.S. population and all the schools and all the textbooks they would use and all the students that have student achievement data, it would be impossible to get every single school in the whole United States to agree. So he and his colleagues have to find a sample that might be representative of the United States in some kind of way, or at least a part of the United States. And then it says here that although 11 schools agreed to participate in the study, student achievement data from only 10 schools were ultimately analyzed. So this is the sample. But this sample is not just schools. And this is where APA is really nice, because I can tell, based on the APA, that here is an indent, and so then there would be another indent, like teachers. That's another part of his samples, teachers, and textbooks. That's another part of his sample. And I stuttered a little bit there, but that was because I was like, oh, the APA looks a little different. But I guess, what year is this article? This is from 2008. And so APA was updated in 2010. So if you were to look at an article from older than 2010, you can't necessarily rely on the APA in that article, because we use APA 6 now. Anyway, so we talked about the conceptual framework in the sample. And so how did I know that it was quantitative? I mean, here there's just like little indicators, like, he's listing out what the variables are, and he's talking about, let's see here, and then the different levels. There's, itemizing it quite clearly, and then his analysis of his data includes ANOVA, which is a statistical test, and OLS regression, and he's computing standard errors. So it seems very quantitative, and that can be intimidating. That was one of the things that came out in the discussion forum, is that, that reading all this can be very intimidating. And so I guess I would just encourage you to read in between the lines, try to look beyond the numbers, and at the end of the day, go back after you read the results and look at the research questions and say, could I have a conversation with somebody about this, and how would I describe it in my own words? And then, usually after the results are reported, there are limitations. And so this is something in the evaluation of the analysis that you can kind of talk about, but there is no perfect research. There isn't, and with research, we never prove something to be entirely true. We can't. Like, one article, even if you had a sample of 10,000 students, I mean, that's never going to prove anything to be entirely true. We can support research to be true, but we can't prove anything. So there's always limitations, and always ways we can make things better in every single article. And so I think it's really important as a scholar and as a teacher researcher to be kind in those evaluations and those. I think it's okay to admit what limitations are, or it's okay to talk about ways to improve it, but definitely need to be kind in it. I don't think that any study is entirely worthless, and I don't think we should treat it as such, especially if it's published. I mean, these people know more than we do since they've read all the literature and did a study on it, and so we should kind of respect that, but maybe critique it. I think we can critique it in a scholarly way and talk about how to improve it, or pieces or gaps that are missing from it. And the discussion is another place. So the discussion will extend the results. The discussion section will go through and it will kind of take the results and kind of unpack it more. And so it's interesting. You see here he talks about how he did a quasi-experimental design. And so if you remember that was in our Cresswell chapter, that means that his participants weren't randomly assigned. So he says here, in fact, the quasi-experimental design of the study implies that strong causal inferences were not warranted because students were not randomly assigned to classes, classes were not randomly assigned to teachers, and teachers were not randomly assigned to one or two curriculum. So I think the discussion is another way to help your mind kind of like grapple with the results even when you're struggling with the statistics. I've been doing stats for a long time, and I've been looking at research for a long time, and I still don't understand every single statistic I ever read, and so it's definitely okay to struggle with that, but just try to pull out the pieces. And so read in between the lines in the quantitative results section, and then the discussion will be another place that you can really kind of think about, okay, so what were the results, what were they saying, and then usually that concludes the article, the discussion. Sometimes they might make implications to practice and things like that. But yeah, so in terms of finding your articles, I'm going to make a video on the data repository and post that in there. But just to kind of like help you, this quantitative article, this can be part of your larger assignments. This can be part of that data repository. This can be part of the data story, as long as it relates to your interests. If you change an interest, it obviously doesn't. But if you have an interest and it somehow fits in, it can all be part of that. So good luck on picking out your article. A few of you have emailed them to me already and asked me if I thought they were quantitative or not, so you're totally welcome to do that. Yeah, so have fun this week reading an article of your interest and unpacking that in an analysis. All right, have a great week.